Good evening and welcome to Nitzavim and Parsha, Sparks, Tidbits on the Parsha, the weekly Torah reading. This week, the last week of the year, the week before the new year of Rosh Hashanah, the year 5778, we are reading the twin Parsha, Nitzavim, Vayelech. Truth is that it's really one Parsha, 70 verses, but in certain years it's split into two. Most years it is read as one continuum, one Parsha. Nitzavim and Vayelech, those are the two names of these two portions. But before we go into the significance of these two portions and the names, we'll focus just on one very important message. Every month is blessed by the Shabbos that precedes the new month. That means, before we enter into a month, the Shabbos before is called Shabbos Mevorchim, the Shabbos in which we bless the new month. And we say a special prayer. We ask God to bless the month. Shabbos is the source of blessing and inspiration for all the days of the following week. So when we venture into a new month, we need to get the inspiration from the Shabbos before. Before we get married, the Shabbos before, we get called up to the Torah. The Torah is the source of blessing, but Shabbos is a source of blessing. So with that introduction, every month we say a special prayer the Shabbos before the new month. There's one exception. This month, the coming month of Tishrei, the new year, the Shabbos before, this Shabbos, we will not say that blessing. And the question is, why not? And there's several answers to this question, but I'm going to share with you the answer that was given by the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, whose birthday we just observed last week. Today is the 23rd day of Elul, tonight is the 24th, and Chai Elul, the 18th, was the birthday of the Baal Shem Tov. And the Baal Shem Tov said the following, that this month of Tishrei, God himself blesses. We don't have to bless it because God blesses that month of Tishrei. And with that blessing, that he blesses the month of Tishrei, it gives us the power to bless all the other months of the year. What is the blessing? It's the Parsha, Atem Nitzavim Hayom Kulchem, translated as you are all standing firm today. What does the word today mean? Today is a reference to Rosh Hashanah, although Moses was saying it to the Jewish people on the day that he was going to leave them, but it also alludes to the day of Rosh Hashanah. So on this day of Rosh Hashanah, the day of judgment, you are standing firm and victorious in your judgment. That is the blessing that we have for this month. And this month is the 7th month of the year, which is something that we'll talk about a little bit later. The paradox, on one hand, it's the new year, and yet it's called the 7th month in the Torah. But the word for 7, Shvi, the Midrash says, also has the connotation of Sova, because the Shin, the letter Shin in Hebrew, if you put the dot on the right, it's Shav, S-H. If you put the dot on the left, it's S. And they're interchangeable. So the word, the 7th month, also means the month that is satiated with all good things. There's so many holidays in this month, so many mitzvahs we can do, and through this month it brings us blessing for the whole year. So the word Nitzavim is translated as standing, but not just standing, but standing firm in a way that we are guaranteed that we're going to have a good judgment, a favorable judgment, and a good year. Now, getting back to what I was saying before, that we have a double parsha. We have Nitzavim, which means standing firm, and we have the second parsha, the second part of the parsha, Vayelech, and he went, referring to Moses going. Now, these two titles are actually contradictory. Nitzavim means standing, but not just standing firm in one place, not budging, not moving. Whereas Vayelech means to keep on going. How do we reconcile these two opposite names, which are put together into one Torah reading? And the answer is that in Judaism, we have two elements. We have the elements of Nitzavim, where a Jew has to stand firm. The word Nitzav is related to a king. The way a king, a monarch, stands firm, he is unbending because he has the power to do whatever he wants. We as Jews, especially when it comes to Rosh Hashanah, we have the power to control the whole universe. Not just the earth, but the whole universe. You know, the anti-Semites say we want to control the world. No, we don't want to control just the earth. We want to control the universe. What does that mean? Of course, that means that we want that the world should be under the dominion of God. And by us accepting God as our king, which we do on Rosh Hashanah, that is how we make sure that God is in full control of this world, that the world accepts his sovereignty, and that the world becomes the ideal world that God had intended it to be, a world that we will experience in the days of Mashiach. At any rate, Nitzavim means standing firm in our beliefs, not bending, not yielding, firm in our commitment to God, firm in our commitment to the commandments, firm in our commitment to the study of Torah. But Vayelech is the other side of the coin. A Jew cannot stand and stay on one place. A Jew must constantly grow and travel from one place to another so that one's life is a continuum. It never stops. That is the difference between Nitzavim and Vayelech. Nitzavim is the firmness with which we attach ourselves to the highest ideals, and Vayelech is that we never stay in one place. Now, I'm going to just go over to Vayelech for a moment. It says Vayelech Moshe, and Moshe went. But it doesn't say where he went, where he had gone. It says he went, and he spoke these following words to all of Israel. For those who are looking in the text, it's chapter 31, verse 1. And nowhere does it say where Moses went. And commentaries grapple with this and give all sorts of explanations. One explanation given by the Targum, the Aramaic translator, that he went lebeis ulfan, he went to the house of study. And what is the remarkable part about this? Here Moses, on the last day of his life, is going to be speaking to the Jewish people. Moses had tremendous amount of experience in addressing the Jewish people. 40 years he had been their leader. He had been their teacher. Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses our teacher. And yet, Moses, before he was going to talk to them, again, goes to the house of study and prepares what he is going to say. What does that tell us? That no matter how advanced we are, no matter how far we progress, we never stop progressing, we never stop growing. He went to the house of study to prepare not just something that he had already known from before. He had plenty of speeches in his repertoire. He looked for something new to say, something, a refreshing way of teaching and of looking at it. The last day of his life. This is a very powerful lesson, that we never rest on our laurels. We never say, I have a life behind me, I accomplished so much, now I'm going to retire. We always look for new ways of growing. So that's the Vayelech as opposed to the Nitzavim. The firmness, staying in one place, and Vayelech, and constantly growing and ascending higher and higher. Getting back to Nitzavim, to the first section, that is chapter 29, verse 9, it says, you are standing today, all of you, before God your God. Then it lists the heads of your tribes, your elders, your officers, all the men of Israel, your small children, your women, your proselyte who was in the midst of your camp, from the ewer of your wood to the drawer of your water. So if you count all the different expressions here, we find 10 expressions that correspond to 10 categories of the Jewish people. Jews are divided into these 10 categories. And it says here, you're all standing today, all of you, together as one. Which means that on Rosh Hashanah, which this verse alludes to, hints to, is a day when we're all together as one. God judges us as one entity, as one people. One of the things about judgment is that when you are judged by yourself, God scrutinizes everything you do, and you're defense is not as powerful as it is when you are together as a group, because God sees a group in a favorable light. And Rosh Hashanah, we stand together as one group in proclaiming God as our King and asking Him to give us a good year. In fact, while one may look at a leader and say the leader is the head, the followers are the legs, the feet. But in some respects, the feet are the head of the body in terms of getting somewhere. Every part of the body is the head of every other part. Same thing is true with the Jewish community. While we have our heads, the leaders, we have the followers, we have everyone in between, different levels in between, in some respect, somebody is the head of everyone else. So that not only are we one people because we share certain characteristics, but we are also capable of uniting in every aspect of who we are, because every one of us has something that gives life to all the others. In this portion, Moses talks about the covenant. He talks about how God made this covenant with those who are here today. This is in verse 14. And those who are not here today. Which means that at Mount Sinai and the subsequent covenants, God made the covenant with every single Jewish soul, the ones that were alive at that time and the ones that had not yet been born. We were all present at Mount Sinai. But on a simpler level, one of the commentators points out that whenever we're in a classroom, for example, you'll have people who are there and people who are not there. I don't mean not there by not showing up, but when they're in the classroom, their mind is focused on something else. There's a lot of talk today about mindfulness. Well, Judaism has spoken about that centuries before it had become popular, millennia before it had become popular. That a person, when they are situated in a classroom, for example, or when you're involved in some type of spiritual pursuit, don't think about the next step. Be totally there where you are. There's a story told of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe's father, known as the Rebbe Rashab, who was going to deliver a very important discourse. But before the discourse, they would sing a Hasidic melody to arouse their spiritual feelings and prepare them for the discourse. And the Rebbe noticed that the students, who were so eager to hear the discourse, were singing at a quicker pace than the song called for. And he called them out for it. He gave a whole talk about how important it is for everyone to be what he called a pnimi. Pnimi literally means an inward type of person. Someone who is totally there where he or she ought to be at the time, and not distracted by what happened before or was going to happen later. You put yourself totally where you are. That's what the Torah is trying to say. I made this covenant with those who are here, who are present, who are totally absorbed in receiving it. But even those who are distracted, who are thinking about the next step, who are thinking about what happened the day before, or the lesson before, or the minute before, to them this message was also directed. In chapter 30, right before chapter 30, at the end of chapter 29, it says, the hidden things are for God, but the revealed are for us and our children, forever, to carry out all the words of the Torah. There are many different interpretations of this. The simple meaning is that it's talking about the sins that we do. God knows our hidden sins. We can't blame others for the sins that we do that are private. But those that are revealed, we are responsible for one another. But when they crossed the Jordan, when the Jews entered into Israel, that's when they accepted upon themselves even to be responsible for the hidden things. There's a principle in the Torah, Rashi refers to this, that even the revealed things we would not punish for until we entered into the land of Israel. and we became, he says, arevim ze lo ze, responsible for one another. This is the principle known in Hebrew, in Talmudic jargon, as arvos or arevos, being responsible for every other Jew. That's why if one Jew wants to do a mitzvah, and he wants to be motzi, to discharge the obligation of the mitzvah of another, he can do that. Why? Because we're all responsible for one another. We're like one entity. The Hebrew word for responsible, arevim, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe translated two other ways. Arevim comes from a root that means mixed up. The plague in Egypt, the mixture of wild animals, is called arov, a mixture. We're all mixed together in one big mix. We might also be mixed up, but that's a separate thing. We're all mixed together as one, and the word arevim also has a third meaning, besides responsible, mixed together, and sweet. That we are responsible for one another. Why? Because we are mixed together as one. We're part of one pot of stew where you have so many different ingredients, but we're all one part of the same thing. You can't separate that one gives a taste to the other. But the third reason goes even deeper, is that we have a sweetness towards one another, that regardless of who the other Jew is, regardless of their level of observance, regardless of their attitudes, regardless of all their faults, the inner quality is sweet. And because we are all sweet to one another, we recognize each other's sweetness, we are one, and because we're one, we're responsible for each other. In chapter 30, this is the most explicit reference to the Messianic age. When Maimonides discusses the Messianic age, which he says will be ushered in by a Jewish leader, a Jewish king called Mashiach, which means the anointed one, there's a misnomer, a very serious mischaracterization, that Maimonides did not believe in a human Mashiach. He only believed in a Messianic age. Nothing can be further from the truth. Maimonides says anyone who does not believe in him, in a Mashiach, in a human being, leader, has denied the whole Torah. So, but nevertheless, Mashiach ushers in a Messianic age. It's hinted, and it's explicit in the beginning of chapter 30, where God says that after all these things will happen to you, positive and negative things, God has dispersed you into exile, reference to exile. Very powerful thing that here Moses is speaking to a new nation who's about to enter into their land, to their homeland, and they're going to be there for well over 800 years. And he's already telling them, you know what's going to happen? You're going to be dispersed. Predicted the exile. But then he says, you will return to God your God and listen to his voice, according to everything that I commanded you today, you and your children with all your heart and all your soul. Then, verse 3, God your God will bring back your captivity and have mercy upon you, and he will gather you in from all the peoples to which God your God has scattered you. If your dispersed will be at the ends of heaven, from there God your God will gather you in, and from there he will take you. God your God will bring you to the land that your forefathers possessed, and you shall possess it. So here is very clear description of how we will return from exile after a long, arduous exile that we will have brought upon ourselves because of our lack of commitment to God's teachings. Then we go over to Vayelech. As I said before, Vayelech means, and he went. Moshe went. Where did he go? I mentioned before, he went to the house of study to prepare for his next and last speech to the Jewish people before he passes on. And some commentaries say that this is a hint to a statement in the Talmud that Moses never died. True, he was buried, but he really never died, because the soul of Moses enters into the leaders of every generation. I'm talking about the spiritual leaders of every generation contain the soul of Moses in them. So Moses' soul has to be down here on earth at all times. And therefore, when it says, Vayelech Moshe, Moshe is going, it means he's continuing. Even after his passing, he's continuing to lead the Jewish people. In fact, It says that even Mashiach, the final redeemer and leader of the Jewish people, has in him the soul of Moses, probably more pronounced than it is in any other leader. And it is through that power of Moses that he has that he will be able to redeem the Jewish people and bring and usher in the Messianic age. So it's Moses that has the power, who is the first redeemer, and it's his power and everything he stands for, particularly the teachings of the Torah, that will be the final redeemer. Here, Moses is telling the people that I'm 120 years today. That was his birthday. He passed away on his birthday. I can no longer continue to take you out and bring you in, and I'm not going to cross the Jordan. But instead, Joshua is going to be doing that. He's going to be the leader. And he tells Joshua to be strong. And in verse 7, Moses calls Joshua, he summons Joshua, and said to him before the eyes of all of Israel, be strong and courageous. Okay, so one commentary says that you have to read it a little different. That Moses summons Joshua, and says to him that when you are in the front of the eyes of all of Israel, be strong. What does he mean by that? Joshua was known for his humility. Joshua was known to be a follower. He was the ultimate follower of Moses. It's not easy for a follower, a quintessential follower, to become an ultimate leader. Not just a leader who consults with others, but who is entrusted with the exclusive power of leadership over an entire nation of Jews who are tough customers, and they have been for the 40 years that they were in the desert. That Moses couldn't even handle them, let alone Joshua, who was not quite the same stature as Moses. But Moses says to him, you're a humble guy. You're meek. You're not going to show your authority because you don't have an ego. But when you're in the presence of the eyes of all of Israel, you must be strong. A leader could be humble to himself. But when he's in public, he has to be very strong, regal, and assert his authority over the people. Otherwise, number one, the people will step on him and they won't listen to anything he says. And number two, it's not his power, it's God's power that is vested in him, and you have to respect that authority. Just like the people have to respect it, the leader has to respect it as well. This Torah portion of Vayelech contains within it the last two of the 613 commandments. First, it has Hakel, the laws of the post-sabbatical year. All Jews were supposed to gather in the temple during the holiday of Sukkot, and the king was to read sections of the Torah. This was a reenactment of the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai, where you brought everyone, men, women, and even little children were part of this experience, one of the most powerful experiences. We had this Hakel year, last year. Last year was a post-sabbatical year, and we'll have it again in 6 years. That's the penultimate commandment, the 612th commandment. The 613th commandment is to write a Torah scroll. God commands the Jewish people to write. This is in chapter 31, verse 19. It refers to the Torah as this song. Teach it to the Jewish people. And later on, in verse 24, Moshe finished writing the words of the Torah on a book. He completed it, and he had it put into the ark, or next to the ark. Two opinions about that. And that remained in the temple for as long as the ark remained in the temple. So here we have the mitzvah of writing a Torah scroll, and raises a question. How many Jews does anyone know that have written Torah scrolls? Number one, most Jews are not scribes. Number two, most Jews have not even commissioned scribes to write Torah scrolls for them. That's a little strange. You have a commandment in the Torah. It's the last commandment. It's hard to overlook the last mitzvah. And yet, very few people have actually had a Torah written for them. So, there are two approaches. The Rebbe, in one of his discourses, actually two separate discourses. In one discourse, he quoted the opinion of Rabbeinu Asher. Rabbeinu Asher was a 14th, 15th century sage, one of the greatest halachic authorities, heralded from Germany. Then he moved to Spain. Rabbi Asher, known as the Rosh, the abbreviation of his name, Rabbi Asher, writes that the Torah's commandment to write a Torah scroll does not mean that you have to actually write a Torah scroll. What it means is that you have to have access to Torah literature, which in those days, the only literature that existed was the Torah scroll, because the oral Torah had to be transmitted orally and was not put in writing. So in those days, to fulfill the mitzvah of writing a text of Torah, you had to write a Torah scroll. Nowadays, when we have most of the teachings of Judaism, the Torah in its broad sense, the oral Torah, we have the Talmud, the Mishnah, we have the teachings of Kabbalah, of Hasidus, of Musar, all the different genres of Jewish scholarship are all part of Torah. So whenever we buy a Jewish book, a Torah book, we fulfill the mitzvah of writing the Torah scroll. The Torah scroll had to be written, but a book could be printed because they don't have to conform to the laws of a Torah scroll. That's one approach why most Jews have not fulfilled this mitzvah of writing a Torah scroll. Another simple answer would be that it couldn't obviously mean that every Jew has to write his own Torah scroll, because it takes a tremendous amount of skill. Not everyone is capable of that. And number two, the expense involved. Today, if you want to have your own Torah scroll commissioned, you're talking about $20,000 to $50,000. But that's not a good enough answer, because there are Jews who are so conscientious that cost would never have been a factor in them doing a mitzvah. Even if it was $1 million, they would find a way of getting $1 million to fulfill this mitzvah. Yet there's only a handful that have actually had Torah scrolls written. And one of the answers the Rebbe gives, it's a very novel idea, is that whenever a synagogue has a Torah scroll, it's actually written on behalf of all the people who participate in that synagogue. And when a person gets called up to the Torah, and he makes the blessing on the Torah, that's his way of confirming that this is my Torah scroll, I have access to it, and it's considered as if I had actually written the Torah scroll. There's another custom that people have, is to purchase letters in the writing of a new Torah scroll, and that is another way of fulfilling the mitzvah. One of the most frequently quoted verses in the Torah, in fact, it's on the title page of the Tanya, the classic work of Hasidus, Hasidic philosophy, and that is Ki karav elecha hadavar miyod beficha uvlevavcha lasoso. This is in the Nitzavim, in the first section, in chapter 30, verse 14, which says that Judaism is not something that eludes us. It's not in heaven, it says in the verses before that. It's not distant, it's not the other side of the ocean. It's very close and accessible to you. That is in verse 14. Rather, the matter is very near to you, in your mouth, in your heart, to perform it. Here you have the three areas of human expression. Human beings express their knowledge or their feelings either through thought. You think of an idea, you think of an emotion. Speech, you verbalize it, you express it through speech. Or action. You act out your feelings, your understanding, and you translate those ideas and feelings into an actual performance of an act. Those are the three expressions of the soul. The Alter Rebbe, the author of the Tanya, refers to these as levushim, as garments, because a garment defines the contours of a human being. The garment tells you what kind of a person, elegant, poor, simple, regal, anything about the person's stature can be revealed through one's garments. And thought, speech, and action reveal who we are. How do I know what kind of a person someone is? I can't read. I don't know his intellectual capabilities. I don't know his emotional strengths or weaknesses. But if I could read his thoughts, then I would know it. But sometimes you yourself don't know who you are until you start thinking. Speech reveals it to the outside, and action concretizes those ideas. And Judaism encompasses all three. Whenever we do a mitzvah, mitzvahs, by definition, are physical actions. There are very few mitzvahs that don't require physical action. Putting on tefillin, giving tzedakah, these are all physical actions. Lighting a Shabbos candle. But a mitzvah requires a bracha, a blessing that is recited before it. Although some mitzvahs do not require a blessing, which is a separate subject, when we say our prayers, that's the preparation for the mitzvahs that we do during the day. And when we pray, it enhances the mitzvahs that we will do. So that's how we have action, and then we have speech as well. But then we also have to have kavanah. When you do a mitzvah, you're supposed to think what you're doing and have a spiritual experience. So every mitzvah is a combination of the three things over here. The ficha in your mouth, that's the verbalizing of the mitzvah by the blessing or the prayer. Bilvavcha in your heart, your thoughts. Heart is another way of saying thoughts. And lasoso, doing it, actually putting the thoughts into action. Well, what does it mean it's very easy to do? We see a lot of people find it very hard to fulfill all the commandments and to do everything in all three levels. So the Alter Rebbe in Tanya explains that the key is the mind. That when a person meditates on God's greatness, when a person meditates on how God permeates everything and is the essence of everything, that will either create an emotion or reveal an already existing emotion deeply embedded within our soul. Because every one of us has that spark of love for God embedded in our soul that we're not even aware of. In fact, a Jew who has never thought about God is capable of even dying rather than betraying the belief in one God in a time of crisis. Because the crisis is a jolt that awakens that spark of love for God that one cannot betray. So we have either an external love that we create through our mind, or we can reveal an internal love. But through the mind, we're able to reach every single one of these ideals in our mouth, in our heart, to do it. Rosh Hashanah is coming up this week. I just want to focus on a few things about Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah is not the beginning of the year, it is the head of the year. The difference between the beginning of something and the head of something is the beginning is merely a measure of location where something is. Head means that it has the power, the energy for the whole year. Rosh Hashanah determines the life of the whole year. What do we do on Rosh Hashanah? We proclaim God as our King. That's the focus of Rosh Hashanah. The mitzvah of Rosh Hashanah is blowing the shofar, but the shofar is there to awaken God's desire that He wants to be our King and have an intimate relationship with us. So that's what Rosh Hashanah focuses on. Rosh Hashanah is also called Tchilas Masecha, the beginning of God's work. Now, Rosh Hashanah is not the anniversary of creation. The anniversary of creation is the 25th day of Elul, 6 days before. Rosh Hashanah is the anniversary of the creation of Adam. And from Adam came Eve, and of course all of humanity. The difference is that before Adam was created, the world had no purpose. It had no direction. It had no way of validating itself. So for all intents and purposes, the world didn't exist. A human being doesn't really exist until they have their existence validated. And that's what happened at Rosh Hashanah, with the emergence of a human being that has free choice and chooses to accept God and coronate God as the King. That's what gives the world meaning and validity, and that's the beginning of existence. That's what we do every Rosh Hashanah. God allocates life, special relationship for 1 year. As the year comes to an end, right before Rosh Hashanah, if people are tuned into the spiritual atmosphere, we would feel faint because God's presence is withdrawn, waiting for us through our prayers and then through the sounding of shofar to bring God back into this world. We'll wish everyone here a traditional blessing of Kasiva, Chasima Tova, to be inscribed and sealed for a good year. Lashana Tova Masuka, a good and sweet year, and it should be a blessed year, a year of only positive things from Aleph to Tav, from A to Z. The Rebbe frequently would go through every letter of the alphabet and illustrate how each letter is a blessing, and may we see all those blessings coming true. The year Tavshin Ayin Ches in Hebrew could be an acronym for Tehei Shnas Idon